Alright, next we go to chapter 4 for EVA 633 Environmental Reporting and Auditing. For chapter 4, Environmental Policy Compliance. For the learning objective, student define environmental policy and corporate environmental policy. Student identify the benefits for the environmental policy. Student will able to identify who should develop the environmental policy. Student will examine what the should and why what should not to include the environmental policy. Student also examine what the motivate companies to have their own environmental policy. Alright, next for introductions. For environmental policy statement, actually they are not required by laws. For environmental policy, they are published by their own organizations uh, to make actions. They have their own statement related on the environmental statement for commit eh, for makes a commitment to organization to support environmental mechanism in our countries. So once any organizations they have environmental policy, that means that organizations have support for environmental programs. Like a few scholars, they have their own statements according to environmental policy. The main point is the commitments any organizations to environmental policy for implementations environmental policy for their organizations. That means their actions, their effort to support environmental programs. For corporate environmental policy, they have a significant rules in business. For CEP statement, actually they have put as a part of organization environmental reports. In others, CEP actually the statements just only focus on the a few informations about the organizations. However, for the CEP, maybe they can willing volunteers to create some of the optional environmental elements. For example, ISO 40,000 standards. So some of organizations they have the use like soft law like the ISO 40,000 for their organizations. So what is an environmental policy? Environmental policy actually is a statement about the organizations and environmental positions and value. For example, the ISO 40,000 standards, they have their own clausa, which is all the top management need to follow for fulfill all the criteria for their programs, environmental programs. According to the International Organizations for Standardizations, defined as a corporate environmental policy as a statement by the organization of intentions and principles in relation to its overall environmental performance, which is for the corporate environmental policy, they can provide a framework for action and for setting some of the organization directions. Let's say Honda, they have their own focus on zero carbon, so their directions can combine with the ISO 40,000 elements to achieve their programs or their goals or their target for zero carbon. Actually, what are the benefits of developing an environmental policy? For each organizations have environmental policy, of course they can get some of the positive part from environmental policy. Any organizations have environmental policy, they can create some of the benchmark for the competitors. So once any organization have environmental policy, first maybe they can have good uh, a um, a good site or a good perceptions, a good perceptions from consumer. Once they have their own environmental policy, that means they contribute to society and of course for environments. And nowadays everybody support for the environmental product. So once they have their own environmental policy, for sure they have grades for environmental products like eco-friendly products. And also, once they have their own environmental policy, they can get some of benefit from governments like tax assumptions. So, who should develop an environmental policy? As we know, every company or every organizations, they have their own environmental departments. For environmental departments, they have HSE or SHO or EO. All right. So for EO, Environmental Officer, Safety and Health Officer, or SHE, Safety Health Environmental Officer, they have their own responsibility to create environmental policy. So after they create for environmental policy, they need to submit uh, to senior managers to endorse for environmental policy. For senior manager, they just only endorse and approve the environmental policy. However, as a HSE or EO, environmental officer, you need to create environmental policy suitable on your organizations, and you can refer any GRI or any environmental policy from the others organizations, and you need to make sure your environmental policy yang you create to are related on your organizations and also suitable on your organization, and you can achieve the environmental policy. You cannot create some of very extraordinary environmental policy yang luar jangka. Alright, you just create a few elements for environmentals in your policy, environmental policy, to make sure you have a commit to support sustainable developments. Next, actually, what is the usual procedure for maintaining an environmental policy? Same goes to environmental management system like ISO 40000. They have some reviewers from auditors. Same goes to the environmental policy. They need to have a reviewer to make sure the environmental policies in their organizations are relevant to use, and also need to revise some of the terms from the environmental policy. So, as a environmental officer or safety health officer, they are tasked to create the environmental policy. So, what are the elements they need to include in an environmental policy? According to the ISO 40000 standards, probably the best references standards they can use or refer from ISO 40000 to create the elements for the environmental policy. Some of environmental policy they can using like to appropriate to the organizations. For EO, maybe they can include the commitment to continual improvement and prevention of pollutions. Maybe they can state the statement for commitment to zero carbon, to reduce carbon. All right, then maybe they can include the commitments to comply to relevance legal and others requirement. Let's say they can relate to the Environmental Quality Act. Then maybe they can provide the framework for setting and reviewing environmental objectives and targets or goals from their organizations. So, from the customer perspective, once they know about the organization have applied or they have their create their environmental policy, so this is a good side for that organizations have a good um, orang kata positive side lah for organization. They can represent their organizations for environments. So, what are the motivations to the company to commit and to implement environmental policy? So for the companies, of course, they have their own targets to make the profit for their companies. However, once they have their environmental policy, of course, they have a good perceptions to from customer, which is their company are commit to support environmentals. Otherwise, their company also can get tax exemptions from governments. All right, next we go to the environmental charters. Actually, what's environmental charters? Maybe some of you familiar with the terms environmental charters from your assignments. So, environmental charters actually provide a guide for responsible environmental decision making within a companies. And environmental charters contain a set of principles relating to the company environmental management system. That means the company have ISO 40,000, let's say. They need to follow all the clauses in in ISO 40,000. Then they create for their own environmental charters companies. So they can create some of the programs or trainings, any the elements, environments for their companies in their environmental charters. As a managers or environmental officer, you need to make sure all the elements, environments you put in your environmental charters companies. So, from the environmental charters, we can get the pros and cons. For the pros of environmental charters, actually can promote open dialogue with the community's stakeholders. So you have your own environmental charters. So for each stakeholders, let's say communities, uh, governments, or any institutions can comment your environmental charters. Then, for the environmental charters can improve the reputations of the company with its stakeholders. That means you have a good reputation once you have represent your environments from your companies. Then you can educate your staff about the company environmental commitments. That means you can involve your staff to involve together with any environmental program from your environmental charters. Then you can create a green corporate cultures because of you already commit and release your environmental charters. However, for the environmental charters, they have their own cons. One of the cons from the environmental charters, the firm only report voluntary to the public. Some of the firm are not obligated to follow the charters. Maybe they just create the charters, however, they not to follow all the charters. Then the organizations, maybe some of the environmental issue may not include into the all policy with their companies.